Okay, so sometimes people ask me, what's your favorite movie? And it's not an easy question because I have a few favorite movies. Christmas movies, on the other hand, enter into a whole other realm. Because if you were to make a Christmas movie and set it not at Christmas, I pretty much guarantee you that almost nobody would watch it. Now, there are exceptions to this rule. A lot of people talk about, what is it? Uh, It's a Wonderful Life. And while that is a Christmas movie, it's also not a Christmas movie. It's the kind of movie that you can actually watch not at Christmas and enjoy it. Um, and that's just because Frank Capra had a kind of universal quality in a lot of his films, in a lot of the films that he and the studios produced. Another really good one that he produced was called Meet John Doe, which also takes place around the holiday time and is really good. And I wish more people talked about that movie because I think it has way more relevance for the world. But generally, I can recommend a good Frank Capra movie almost any time because it's kind of universal fare. It's usually lighthearted. It usually has some family friendly element to it, and I like it better than a lot of the Hallmark movies that you see, or a lot of the ABC Family movies, which are a whole other level of hell. But I'll get into one of those later. For now, let's talk about one of my least favorite mainstream Christmas movies, and there are a lot. I cannot stand Jingle All the Way. I think it is incredibly consumerist and shallow. I think it is ridiculously unbelievable, and at best would have been better done as an animated feature rather than live action. It's also rather upsetting to see Jake Lloyd in that film, since immediately after finishing that film, he went on to do Star Wars Episode 1, and then he had a lot of problems after he did that film and just in his everyday life. And that can be pretty upsetting when you see someone that young and you know that the rest of their life was kind of spent in decline. So that's always pretty sad. But then, on top of everything else, you get worse things. Like, The Christmas Tree's another one where if you made that movie and it wasn't about Christmas, it would really not even be, it would not even have even been produced. And it just goes on with that for a lot of different kinds of movies. If it isn't, if it doesn't involve Christmas somehow, then people wouldn't have bothered with it. But because it involves Christmas, they go ahead, pump money into it, produce it, and it can be the biggest pile of crud that you've ever seen. So that being said, it's nice to take a minute here and talk about my least favorite mainstream one, which is Christmas with the Cranks. This was released in 2004, and for a budget of $60 million, yielded $96.6 million. And it's based on a novel by John Grisham. Yes, that John Grisham, called Skipping Christmas. The screenplay was by Chris Columbus, and it was directed by Joe Roth. Now, this is a movie where you have to kind of really look at it as it is. Because from what I can tell, in 2004, it seems like they were trying to recapture everything that was in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, but without making it National Lampoon and with an entirely different cast. So you had a bunch of other actors in the roles. They got one of the 1970s Saturday Night Live actors, Dan Aykroyd, to be in it as a secondary character instead of Chevy Chase as, some kind of secondary character. But it still takes place in Illinois. So when you're watching it, it's like, wait a minute, this takes place in suburban Illinois in a really kind of upper middle class area. Where have I seen this before? Gee, I don't know. Anyway, so they get into a really weird premise. Um, Luther and Nora Crank have a daughter who's going off into the Peace Corps. And one of the things that I know very well from having inquired about the Peace Corps a few times is that you do get to fly home for the holidays. This is not some kind of strange thing. But, so they just think that they're going to have, nothing to do with her. And it is immediately following Thanksgiving. She's going off to do this assignment. That is not how Peace Corps assignments work, last I checked. I'm pretty sure that you had to start at a certain time, usually in the fall or something like that, that it doesn't quite work that exact way. But I could be totally off about that. Anyway, so this happens just after Thanksgiving, and I'm like, no. One of the other times I believe that they have you start a Peace Corps assignment generally, and this is usually after training and everything, is they have you start like in January or February or something. They don't just, pick an arbitrary time. They want a time when it's kind of normal for things to transition. So they usually do something in the fall or something at the start of the new year. But again, I could be totally off about this. Anyway, so the couple, Luther and Nora, are going through kind of empty nest syndrome, but I'm like, how? Yeah, the house is empty, but you have an entire town of neighbors who know you all very well, and you can go hang out with them anytime, and they can come over and hang out with you all the time. This is one of the reasons why you settled down in this area, right? Because you know everyone, and you've put down roots, and you're part of the community. Anyway, so Luther figures out that the previous year they spent over $6,000 on the holiday season, and I'm looking at the stuff that they apparently spent all this money on: decorations, gifts, and entertainment. And I'm like, okay, gifts, I understand. That's something that you spend on. But decorations? Don't you just buy decorations and then you have the decorations for when the season comes back around? Isn't that how decorations work, or do they fall apart immediately? So obviously this is a very consumerist film, and it's one of the reasons why I have such a problem with it. I have a big problem with a lot of films like this that emphasize shopping and spending as part of what you do at Christmas. Because for me, it has never been. Like, I make very small purchases, or I get a few very well thought out gifts or very practical gifts. That's just how I roll. So for me, this consumerist idea is very strange. I'm sure that it's not in this little world, but to me, it is one of the most bizarre ideas going. Why would you buy more decorations? And what exactly is spending money on entertainment? So I guess that they hold a party every year. But anyway, they get this idea that instead of doing that, they could just, go and go on a Caribbean cruise instead. And I'm like, for $6,000, that's pretty expensive. And they're like 10 days on a Caribbean cruise, that's $600 a day. Honestly, I just don't see it. For me, that would be like ridiculous. But that's a lot of money for me. These people have like serious first world problems. And I'm just really weird about it. So anyway, they're like, oh, well, we'll still make the donation to the church and the children's hospital. I'm like, okay, who wrote this? And I know exactly who wrote this because the screenplay was by Chris Columbus. But honestly, it like it feels like they should have set it at another time, like in the 60s or something, because none of it actually makes sense. They could have scaled back the amount of money that they spent if they had set it in the 60s. But I'm so weird about this. So, getting back to the story, the townsfolk, the other people in the town, are not thrilled about the idea that the Cranks aren't going to be celebrating Christmas, but it's like, well, why don't you just tell them, hey, well, we decided since our daughter is out of the house and we don't really have to be, keeping anything up for her, and we're kind of feeling the empty nest, a good way to reset is to sort of get out of the house for a little while. And so we're just going to go on a cruise for a few days to kind of help ourselves recover a little bit so that we're able to carry on our lives. It's a very kind of self-care kind of thing. And I've found that it really does help if you're going through some kind of transition process to get away from the living space for a while so that when you come back to it, you can mentally reset. And that way, even if you have reminders of that person, you've had enough time away that you can reset your mentality and get it off of the headspace you were in. That doesn't always make sense to some people, but I'm like, that's not necessarily a bad idea. Personally, I would suggest not taking a $6,000 cruise and instead kind of maybe socking some of that money away, still donating to charity, but, doing other things too, like just going on a trip. How's that? Just go on a trip, see some sights. It doesn't have to be anything strange, but like go to a hotel. Maybe, or, I know they didn't have Airbnb back in 2004, but the point is there are lots of things you can do. You can go and visit old friends or family that you haven't seen in forever and spend time with them and get away from the house, which is the main focus. But the rest of the town just isn't pleased, and they're like, oh, you're just a Scrooge. And it's like, hello. Apparently they've been celebrating pretty intensely for years and spending a lot of money on all of it, and they just had their daughter fly off in the Peace Corps and, go down to South America for a while. So this is not that strange an idea. Spending a little bit of time with just each other, doing one of the things that they've wanted to do for a long time. It's not weird. So, they try to make it sound like they're boycotting Christmas, but they really aren't. They're just not going to be there. They're taking that time, and they're going to be enjoying themselves elsewhere. There is something that I don't understand that happens in the movie. They decide to go tanning at the mall. Now, forgive me for this, but if you're going on a cruise, why would you tan before you go? Honestly, the whole point of going on the cruise is that you get some sun on the boat while you're there. Not, while you're doing something else. You don't... It just doesn't make sense to me. Why on earth would you do that? It's just as an excuse so that they can get a scene in where they're wearing like little skinny bathing suits. And I just don't feel that. It doesn't work. So anyway, out of the blue, on Christmas Eve morning, the daughter, Blair, calls in to say she's at Miami Airport and is going to be catching a connecting flight back up to Illinois. I'm like, wait a minute. You didn't let them know that you would be flying back? You had days and weeks to plan this out and get them something, an email. It's not impossible to email, even down in Peru, And the Peace Corps tries to make sure that family members hear from the Peace Corps members. Mail gets through. It's not this ridiculous thing. Anyway, and on top of that, she somehow has a Peruvian fiancé. I'm like, how? You have been in Peru a month. Honestly, think about this. You have Thanksgiving, and then 1 month later, Christmas Eve. You've probably been in Peru only a few weeks, and you're already engaged to this man? I don't think so. That is absolutely bizarre. It makes no sense. So, that whole plot point is really bizarre. You could just have it that she's flying back. It doesn't have to be that she's engaged. That, to me, just seems like over contrivance. Maybe it was in the book, but I doubt it. Because I don't think that John Grisham would write that badly. You know, if you said it was a year, and, you know, maybe the Christmas immediately after they were going through all their finances and realizing that, you know, they were having to spend all this money and their daughter wasn't even there, and so everything kind of felt hollow. And it also takes a while for empty nest syndrome to kind of set in. It takes a little bit longer than a couple of weeks. So I just don't know. The whole premise is so bad. They're scrambling to get food. They're trying to get all the decorations up. All kinds of crazy crap happens. And I flipped past this movie the other day when it was on TV. And there was a scene that I remembered, and I thought it was terrible at the time, and it still rings as terrible. They had this poor kid from Malcolm in the Middle. You probably remember him. He played the youngest brother. And they cast him in the film, right? As this paper boy in the neighborhood or whatever. And they decided to have this whole little parade of the kid on the bicycle and then the cop car right behind to try and slow down everything before while the cop car picked the young couple up from the airport. I'm just like, okay, I can appreciate that they wanted to slow things down, but you could just slow things down. You could just like say, oh, well, we had some ice on the road earlier, so we're just going to take it slow. Not a problem. I don't think the couple would mind. Besides, you're in a cop car, it's safe. So, but then on top of that, they've got the poor kid from Malcolm in the Middle riding on a bike in this absolute blizzard of a snowfall in the film. Like, I realize that it's just a set, that it's just like a row of houses and they have a snow machine on set doing all of this, and it's probably fake snow. But they had this poor kid out and about with no hat on, presumably in the cold, with all these houses, all this crap, and he's like clearly squinting to try and see through everything so that he can bike through it all. And I'm sure that the bike is probably on an arm so that he's not actually having to pedal, because it seems like he's pedaling too slow to actually move himself at the necessary pace, especially through thick snow. But they're playing this song, and it's like, okay, I realize this is all kind of that has all been building up to it, that, oh, they weren't going to have Christmas, and then suddenly they have to rush everything forward and get it all done within a day. And I'm like, no. You know why? Here's why. Be honest. Just tell the kid, oh, we didn't know that you were flying up for Christmas, and we didn't have anything set up. So, you know, we'll have plenty of food and everything, but we haven't gotten any gifts. We were planning on taking a cruise. So if you guys want to, you can watch the house while we're away, and the neighbors will be very happy to see you, and you'll have the house to yourselves, and then, you know, we'll be on our cruise. But, no. Instead of being honest with people and instead of, just coming forward with things, everything is reliant on pretense and expectations. Expectations that are not fair. Suddenly, everyone has to spend all this money and get a honey glazed ham and all this other crap. And it's like, that doesn't work. That isn't how the world works. Just make your lives simple. Heck, they live in Illinois. Why not go to Chicago or St. Louis or, heck, Branson? I mean, if you really just need to reset yourselves, you can do so for a lot less in cost, is my point. You don't have to spend oogas of money, and you can just let people know, well, it's just we're kind of having a hard time since our daughter moved out, and we want to do a kind of a reset. But instead they go, oh no, we're boycotting Christmas. Boycotting indicates you have some kind of objection to Christmas, which if you are still of that religion and you're still celebrating Christmas, you could just say, well, we have plans. We're going out of town, and that's why we're not putting up any decorations or doing anything else. We're still going to be donating to the usual charities, but we're just going to be going out of town for a few days. So, that's why we're doing this. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. The whole plot revolves around everybody hating the Cranks, and then the Cranks are like, oh, come on, everyone, please be nice. This is what's been happening, and, it's kind of a twist on the Liar Revealed plot, but it's not okay. I don't feel good with this movie. I've watched it a few times in the past, and it has never made me feel better about the holidays, myself, anything. It's never made me laugh. It's not a good movie. It is one of the rare cases where I will give Christmas with the Cranks a 1 out of 5. I do not give 0s and 1s out of 5 very often unless a movie just manages to tick me off and bore me to tears. Now, speaking of which, I believe I already did a review of this film at some point in the past, but Holiday in Handcuffs is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. This one falls into the category of made-for-TV Christmas movies, which has a whole different set of issues. You usually have some stars who are on the B list. Usually they have a hosting gig, or maybe they do an occasional spokesperson thing. But they were hot at one time. In this case, it's Melissa Joan Hart and Mario Lopez, who were both hot in the 90s in their respective shows. Saved by the Bell and Clarissa Explains It All. And then Melissa Joan Hart was also big on Sabrina the Teenage Witch. So you also have Markie Post and June Lockhart and a few other actors in it, but the film itself is just god-awful. And what hurts the most about it is that while it was made for a budget of $5 million, it manages to be this... Apparently it was one of the most watched ABC Family movies ever made. Let's think about that for a minute. It is one of the most watched ABC Family movies ever made. Now, they do this thing on ABC Family, which is now Freeform network, called 25 Days of Christmas. And it is absolutely nauseating because you get movies censored, edited for time, and interrupted with commercials constantly. And I have Christmas movies that if I wanted to, I could put in and watch, and I would have way more fun. So here's my thing. The basic plot. I'm reading off Wikipedia. Trudy, played by Melissa Joan Hart, is an aspiring painter working as a restaurant waitress. So already it's like, okay, so she's a waitress who happens to paint. because that's what she does every day, and she doesn't really paint every day. And apparently she like is totally dressed up a mess, as I remember at the beginning of the film. Anyway, it says, with pressure to please her parents building, she misses a job interview and gets dumped by her boyfriend just before Christmas, and she has a nervous breakdown. So you missed the appointment for the job interview. Guess what? Usually they're willing to reschedule. Usually they are very understanding about this and will understand, especially if the weather's bad. So it's not that big a deal. As for being dumped by the boyfriend, guess what? Anyone who dumps you just before the holidays, or anyone who fires you just before the holidays or a family event, you are better off without them. I will say that honestly. Because there are some folks who just are that calloused. Anyway, so stressed about going home for the holidays without a boyfriend, she kidnaps David Martin, a random customer, played by Mario Lopez, at the restaurant in which she works, and introduces him to her parents as her boyfriend, who's she calls Nick, even though his name is David. Trudy's family is vacationing at a very isolated log cabin miles away from anyone else. Well, isn't that convenient? So anyway, David is unable to escape, although he makes several attempts. He finally decides to play along until the police come, but he ultimately falls in love with Trudy, of course, and understands the family pressure that made her feel forced to kidnap him in the first place. Hell no. Just because he gets Stockholm Syndrome does not mean that it makes it okay to kidnap and handcuff someone who you do not know and force them into playing some kind of part. I remember watching the movie, and a lot of people watched the movie largely because of the title and the stars. They were like, oh, I really like those actors back on that thing that I used to watch back in the 90s. But then the title alone, Holiday in Handcuffs, every single family member had the exact same response, I guarantee you, no matter what. Upon hearing the title, they immediately said, sounds kinky. I guarantee you that is what the person that you introduced the film to said. And I was reminded of the movie recently by a post by Obscurus Lupa, who I follow on Twitter. But here's the thing. The film absolutely drove me up the wall. It was that painful. I have watched some crap, and I know so has Lupa and Phalis, who both were watching the movie together, and apparently they were laughing their heads off at how bad it was. But I absolutely cannot stand this film. It is terrible and so contrived, and it works out in such a way that it's absolutely idiotic. Oh, they have a few touching moments, and she opens up about things. Now, if you reversed this situation where a man kidnapped a woman and forced her to pretend to be his girlfriend, you would not have a charming film. You would have a horror movie. Okay? Now, she tries to manipulate him and make it like super cute. And, oh, she's just a flaky little sweetheart and an angel at best. She isn't mean to him. It's like, yes, she is. She gets rid of his cell phone. She does all kinds of things to manipulate him and puts him in handcuffs. She binds him physically and keeps him from being able to run away. Honestly, there are people who will pretend to be your boyfriend for a holiday. You put out a thing and say, emergency, I need a pretend boyfriend. There will be, we'll work out terms, but I need someone for the holiday to borrow for my boyfriend. Or ask a friend. This woman is, I guess, completely alone and doesn't have any male friends who can just pretend to be her boyfriend. Or, how about this? Be honest. See, I keep harping on this, but a lot of these movies are based around lying, and I don't think that lying and Christmas should really be that closely entwined, because it makes it so ridiculous that we would have characters who would put on these kinds of airs for the holiday. I mean, it's ridiculous. If your boyfriend dumped you and you missed a job interview just before the holiday, tell your family. Your family is the one entity and group that would understand, and they would probably have a lot more sympathy for you. They would say, "Oh, wow, that's really awful. Well, I can understand how you might be feeling, sweetheart. Guess what? We're going to try and take your mind off that by having the best Christmas we can. How's that?" So, I mean, just be honest about it. But no, Trudy is invited to show her art at a local art gallery and is stunned to see one of her pieces is sold during the show. As she is leaving the show, she is kidnapped and taken to a nearby building. Oh, because kidnapping is so innocent. Her kidnapper turns out to be David. He tells her he bought this building and is making it into an architecture/art studio. He decided to turn his life around and do something he really loves, owning his own architecture business. His business also includes an art studio, and his first art piece is Trudy's painting, which he purchased. David admits his love for Trudy, and Trudy admits her feelings towards him as well. They share a kiss as the credits start to roll. God, no. I mean, it's just awful. First off, you can never get over the fact that Timothy Bottoms, who plays the father, is a George W. Bush impersonator professionally and has done so on many different shows. But on top of that, he looks terrifyingly like George W. Bush and can't really get out of the character when he's acting in other things. And since this came out in 2007, just as the Bush years were winding down, it's more than understandable that he might have been looking for other work, doing some other roles, something in comedy. Perfectly fine. But if you're going to do that, I don't know, get a different haircut, change your face up a little bit, maybe grow some facial hair. Something that changes your look just a little bit. I know a lot of old men have mustaches these days or goatees and whatnot. Go for it. You know what? If it changes your look that much that when people are watching, they don't immediately think, is that George W. Bush or some look-alike? Just get away from that. But then on top of that, you've got Markie Post, Melissa Joan Hart, and Mario Lopez. Now, for those who don't know, Markie Post was on a very well-known and beloved sitcom on NBC called Night Court. And she played the defense counsel for all of the different small court cases that came through the nighttime courtroom, which were usually all of the crank cases, all of the leftovers from the daytime courtroom, all of the minor arrests like prostitution, that kind of thing. So they would get a lot of the same old. It was very routine. It was one of those shows that kind of came out of the same school of writing as, what is it? Dang it, I can't think of the show. The one about the cop. It had fish on it. Oh, I want to say Archie Bunker, but that's All in the Family. I can't think of it. Anyway, but the point is that, they would get a lot of random people in there who were having problems, and they would figure out different things, and there would be different zany events going on in the story that would kind of pad it out a little bit, so that you didn't just have the drama or the intensity sometimes, but you would have like all other kinds of things going on in the story. Anyway, Markie Post is really good. I'm like, great. June Lockhart's really good. She's been like a staple of an actress for a long time. Awesome to have her in that. Melissa Joan Hart and Mario Lopez, they really were banking on trying to get those actors onto something, and I think that they had like other roles come up as a result of being in that. Like they built up enough capital in sort of made for TV Hollywood that they were able to do some things with that. I know that Melissa had a show with Joey Lawrence for a while called Melissa and Joey, imaginatively enough. And Mario Lopez has been doing like hosting duty on different game shows and whatnot over the past several years. But the film drives me nuts. Holiday in Handcuffs is just god awful. It's terrible entertainment. It is not funny. Like, it doesn't even enter into any kind of risque realm where you actually might want it to go as soon as you hear the title Holiday in Handcuffs. And I guarantee you, most people watched it for the title and the actors. They promoted the heck out of that movie. I remember when it came on. I watched it and I gagged. I watched it and I just was like, what is this? I really didn't have fun watching it. And that's one of the worst offenses a story can take. It was boring. And it was badly written. And it was overly contrived and predictable. And it came out, like I said, in 2007. The Bush years were some terrible years for movies in many ways. You just didn't have as much of the creativity in a lot of the stories as you wanted. And to me, it's kind of emblematic of what you get under a lot of conservatives. You get a lot of the same old, same old. And it ends up kind of killing everything. It makes things really difficult and frustrating for those of us who are reviewing things, because we end up getting a lot of crap that just gets shoveled out because the entertainment business gets a lot of money for made-for-TV garbage. But that being said, should you check out these movies? Only if you're in the mood to watch something really bad that you're going to make fun of. Then you might actually enjoy yourself, have a bit of fun, and be able to do something. And that's mostly if you just have time to kill and you want it on in the background so you can go, what the heck? But, yeah. Don't watch it if you actually want to have fun. Don't actually watch it at all if you can take my recommendation. Holiday in Handcuffs actually gets the 0 out of 5. It's completely unoriginal. The casting, even though it has like some good names attached to it and some, I won't even say decent acting, it's just mediocre. It's bland. It's uninteresting. It's way too contrived and conventional. It doesn't leave you feeling good. And that's the worst thing that you can do with a Christmas movie, is make things so that the person feels bad. And I just don't end up being happy, because all of these movies make it seem like everything will just work out fine. And in reality, you have to make things happen. Other people have to make things happen. You don't just have everything work out. If you kidnap someone and handcuff them and throw away their cell phone and make them pretend to be your partner under duress, guess what? It's not romantic. If, you tell people, oh, we're just not doing it this year and whatever, and you act like a bunch of grumps and you don't bother being honest with people, if you keep lying with people just to have some kind of weird pretense for things, guess what? You're not helping the situation. You're not making things better for yourself. So none of these films has a good, positive, moral takeaway. It doesn't make you feel good. It doesn't make you laugh. It certainly didn't make me laugh at all, and I laugh at a lot of things. But it just wasn't enjoyable to watch either of these, and they are ones to avoid if you want to have a good holiday. Hopefully, if you like them, go ahead. It's okay to like them. I like things that other people like, but and I like some things that other people don't like. But the point is, these are the ones that I advise you to avoid, just because if you follow me and you know how my taste is, go ahead. But you know what? If you have a Christmas movie that you absolutely hate and you cannot stand watching, go ahead and leave it in the comments below. I would love to see them, and maybe share some thoughts on that. Just be constructive and respectful, okay? Anyway, so thanks for watching. If you want to like, subscribe, if you want to support my work, please donate on Patreon. Username ClaudaYT. So thanks again, and take good care. Bye-bye.